Hello and welcome to the Coaching Chapters podcast, the space where ideas turn into actions and dreams become reality. I'm your host, Beenish Mirza, and in each episode I will sit down with some really wonderful, incredible women who've taken a spark of inspiration and transformed into something so meaningful. These are real stories of purpose, passion, and perseverance. So wherever you're listening from, settle in and get ready to be inspired. In today's episode, I'm joined by debut author Thammika to explore her wonderful and powerful novel, Stamford Hospital. It's a bold, honest story that brings to light the often unspoken realities of womanhood. We talk about the quiet pressure of expat expectations, the breakdown of a marriage, and the difficult taboo truths surrounding motherhood. It's a conversation about identity, loss, growth, and the uncomfortable but necessary realization that we also change in the process. What we want from a relationship, what we want from life, and from ourselves evolves over time, and that is also okay. So wherever you are, grab a cup of tea, take a deep breath, and join us for this rich and reflective conversation. So Thammika, thank you so much for joining today. I'm so delighted to have this conversation with you and have you as part of the Coaching Chapters podcast. So it'd be really lovely if you could just introduce yourself to people that might not know you or are not familiar with the work that you're doing.
Okay. Thank you for having me. My name is Thammika Songkaeo, and I'm the author of Stamford Hospital, which launched in April 2025 in Singapore and just launched in the UK, the US, as well as other countries in mid-June this year. So I am a third culture kid with a Thai passport, but I grew up all over the place, maybe similar to some of our listeners here. I grew up in India, Los Angeles, Thailand, studied abroad in Uganda, Rwanda, went to school in Massachusetts, Philadelphia, Texas, lived in DC, and now I've been living in Singapore since 2014.
Wow, so exciting. And so many layers to you.
Yeah, I am a mother of a 9.5-year-old sweet girl. And I am also a writer who actually specialized in creative nonfiction, but ended up selling a novel to the publisher of Stamford Hospital, which is Penguin. Yeah.
Great. And so we're definitely going to be, discussing your book today, Stamford Hospital. Really interested in knowing a bit more about the title and the themes of the book. But what is one topic you'd like to bring to the conversation today?
I think I'd love for us to hold this space as a space for difficult conversations that aren't usually given room in society, whether that's because people who are speaking are self-centering out of difficult emotions, or whether it's because as a society we say that there are certain things we can talk about and other things that we cannot talk about. So I'd really appreciate if this could be a space where we acknowledge the wholesomeness of humanity and of a person's individuality or individual experiences, and come together to say what comes up for a person in their lifetime, what comes up for a person at any given instance, and how can we pay attention to that instead of sweep it under the rug.
Yeah. And do you have certain examples or themes within those difficult conversations that you're referring to?
I think so. And I think these are the themes of my book. And I would really say there are two main themes in the book. The first one is the difficulty, the emotional and physical difficulty of motherhood. And I would still call that a taboo because in some cultures, including the Thai culture where I'm from, you're not supposed to admit that you're having a difficult time raising your child. And particularly not if the reason for the difficulty is that you prefer to do something more intellectual with your time. The second theme, I think, comes up a lot in my book, which is intimacy in a marriage, physical and emotional intimacy in a marriage, and what happens when a marriage is missing intimacy. And I'd still think about that as a taboo in society because many times I think people think about themselves as people who have to present themselves as half or at least part of a complete, wholesome, beautiful marriage. There's actually something quite shameful still about having a marriage that's falling apart. And so many of us don't want to present ourselves that way to society, even if that may be a reality. So I'd love if our conversations could revolve around these two themes, because I think it gives space to what is real for many people that they cannot yet give voice to sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And both of those themes, then. So, actually, could you talk us through the premise of Stamford Hospital? What is the story we're stepping into when we first open the page?
Sure. So Stamford Hospital follows a tired mother as she checks in her young, barely ill daughter into a hospital, which she uses as childcare because it comes with nurses. So there in the space of the hospital, she begins to have space for herself intellectually and emotionally. And she begins to reckon with everything that she's struggled with in her marriage too. So when the first page opens, she is alone, and it's a chance for the readers to see the loneliness that a woman has to embody, not by choice. And we tie this loneliness that she experiences as a wife to the loneliness that she experiences as a mother as well. Eventually, we see that unfold in the first chapter.
Yeah. And then, so tell us more about, the characters, the main scenes of the story, then.
Yeah. So the character's name is Teresa, which is a Thai name. And I named her Teresa because it's a name that at once sounds like it flows, but at the same time, her reality comes with being stuck. So she is a woman who came to Singapore thinking that it would be her gap year between a master's and a PhD at a very good school where she was actually invited to become a PhD student, which we or anybody who's ever tried to be in academia knows is extremely rare. Normally you have to apply and likely won't get the spot. But this is a story of somebody so intelligent that she's actually offered a spot to go to Harvard for a PhD. But then because she's not American, she has to do a gap year somewhere between her master's and her PhD. And so she decides, because her partner is in finance, that, hey, Singapore is a great place they could go as a couple. He would have a job, and she could just do something for fun for her gap year and then go back to the US for a PhD. But after they move here, something happens where he makes the decision without a real conversation that no, they're actually not going to go back to the US. So this ambitious, intelligent, highly capable woman finds herself in a country where the industries are not those that she can fully professionally participate in. And there's actually no room for her to perform as a professional. And so we see how, given this foundation of a trap, there's really no place she can go. So she becomes a mother. But as a mother, she realizes that full-time motherhood is not in sync with who she really is. She's not meant to do this. And we see her mind slowly unravel over 2 nights. Stamford Hospital is a novel that happens over 2 nights, actually. And it happens in a hospital mostly because that's where she checks in her daughter, wards her, and begins to live a life on her own while the daughter is warded.
Fantastic. So, Stamford Hospital, where is it and where did the title or the name for it come from?
Yeah, that's a good question. So Stanford Raffles, Sir Stanford Raffles is a prominent figure in Singaporean history. So by naming the book Stanford Hospital, I rooted it in Singapore. The story does take place in Singapore. And the idea of a hospital was important to me to mention in the title because I think that the hospital is a place where symbolism is rampant. But at the same time, what was more important to me was to signify the setting and how briefly the story takes place. It's just 2 nights. And for me, it was an interesting exploration to undertake to see what can really happen to a human mind in that very, very short expanse. What to other people might be, oh, a hospital stay of 2 nights. What could really happen becomes to this character a potentially life-changing moment. And so for me, calling it Stamford Hospital was not only a nod to the setting of Singapore, but it was also an interest in what could really happen in a short hospital stay where we might think not much could happen.
Yeah, I actually find that so fascinating because actually anyone that's experienced being in hospital or at any point, whether it's for themselves, their children, partners, family, loved ones, time does sort of stop. It does slow down. Everything feels a lot longer. So when you say the book is um, based over a 2-day period, it's intriguing to know actually what made up that 2-day period in the hospital.
Yeah, in the book, the 2 days are made up largely of thoughts, and I often tell people it's a story of a mind. And for me, why it was important to write a story of a mind instead of the story of what happens on the outside was because I think I've learned from my own experience that what really determines a human life or how they experience their life is not the physical stuff that's transacted, but it's what goes on in their mind. So if we're able to follow somebody for 2 days, 2 nights in this case, what is it that we get to see? What is it that we could potentially acknowledge about the minds of others? And how might we, as people who have read this novel, move on from our lives and understand that every time we're actually sitting with somebody, we're sitting with so many of the thoughts that they don't say, but that impact their lives significantly. So I was interested in that.
Yeah, and I really like that around understand people's minds, their mindsets, their thought processes. So if we go into your mindset now and your thought process, what was the main inspiration, the driver for the book, and particularly the themes that you're referring to around the difficult conversations, the piece around motherhood, intimacy in a marriage?
Yeah. So you know how they say, write what you know? I would say that these are things I know personally. And I have come to acknowledge that I've gone through a lot. I made space for this writing, not at the start, eyeing it as a book. I was writing at first to process my own life and to survive. And I dare use the word survive because I know that every time I went to the page to write, I was performing an act for myself. So initially, I wrote just for myself. But what happened really was that I was writing one day, and somebody I knew who was a writing professor in an MFA program based in the US came up to me and he said, Tamika, if you're writing this much, why don't you just join a community of other people who write? I said, okay, how would that look? He said, just join an MFA and begin to write. So I actually drained all of my savings to go to an MFA that was based in the US. I would fly there once in a while and be in residencies with my classmates. But yeah, I began Stamford Hospital itself to acknowledge the things that were going on in my own life. And as I wrote and edited each time, I think I realized that a human can go through so much pain and agony, but making space for it as both the observer and narrator of your own life is empowering. And it gives you a sense, almost like a compass, of how to look at your own life in a way where it's a story. And I one day gave the full manuscript to Penguin and they took it. And yeah, they took it as a novel, which I wouldn't say is wrong. In fact, I told them, please take this as a novel. And that experience in and of itself taught me that there's a way to look at your own life almost in third person at times. And it helps to create sense. It's a way of sense making. But it's also a way to live fully, fully, fully with yourself, or at least more fully than you might if you were just a passerby or a victim in your own life.
Thank you so much for actually just sharing the fact that so many of these themes, experiences that you are bringing to the story is something that you've experienced or you know yourself. And I think that takes a lot of courage, even to say as a writer, that there is those sort of similarities between you potentially and the characters in your book. So if we move over to Teresa then, so what is sort of the quiet thread that's running through her mind? What is she navigating? How is she getting empowered through her own mindset and her own process within the book?
Yeah. So what she navigates at times literally is a bowl of strawberries, which, as if you're a parent listening to this, you know that sometimes you have to navigate fruit with your children. And what we hear when she navigates something like that is what goes on in a person's mind as they're giving their child strawberries. I think many times when we see a mother giving her child or her children food, we assume that she's quickly performing an act of nourishment that she's not thinking about. But what if, like in some of our realities, as the people giving our children strawberries, what if what's going through our minds is, shoot, I didn't wash off the pesticide. Oh my gosh, I'm a horrible mom for doing that. Should I give her 5 strawberries or should I give her 10? If I give her 10, will she be too full for dinner? If she's too full for dinner, how would that delay dinner? How would that impact what time I'm able to give her a shower? How would that impact my own bedtime? So all these, trails of thoughts we normally don't see when we watch a parent perform a parenting act. But those of us who have been parents know that there's often anxiety attached around most acts of parenting, especially when our children are young. So at times, we navigate this woman's mind with her as she's looking at strawberries. But other times, we also see her navigating bigger questions, such as looking at her spouse and going, I get that he's a really great father. So he's the father of this child. But without intimacy, who is he in relation to me? So I think to answer your question, I think we come to understand how much a person's life goes from the tangibles to the intangibles and how they look out into the world and relate to things, whether that's strawberries or whether that's another human. But I think we come to understand that a human essentially lives her life sense making out of relationships and responsibilities.
Yeah. I love the depth in the reflections and the responsibilities that you call out. And I know a number of parents, particularly maybe even mothers, will relate to that. Actually, the tabs, we talk about the tabs being open all the time in, our minds. But each tab has a lot of noise on it. So actually, yeah, what's going through her mind while she's just weaving strawberries? Um, so thank you. Yeah, no, that sounds very, very intriguing to understand more around Teresa and her mindset. And so when you were writing about when you were writing about these themes, when you were telling the story through Teresa in Stamford Hospital, what were you hoping the readers getting out of the 2 days that they're experiencing through your book?
There was quite a lot of stuff I was hoping for, but I think the primary one is for readers to know they're not alone. I didn't know of many people who were going through marriages without intimacy or people who felt like they had spaces to talk about how difficult parenting was for them, especially when parenting comes under the form of motherhood, where that comes with a whole history of expectations and taboos. And I was imagining somebody holding the book, seeing what's written in there, and seeing a mirror of themselves. And I hope that that in and of itself would sometimes be the light for somebody's dark days. And I think, on the other hand, I also hoped that spouses who are in marriages without intimacy in particular would know that they're not alone. And I think that that bucket of people is harder to identify than people who are struggling with parenthood. I think there's now become more room in society to talk about struggling as parents, and there's still much less room to talk about how one is doing with one's partner because the institution of marriage dictates such loyalty at times that you're not supposed to speak ill of your partner at all, and you're actually not supposed to air any dirty laundry, right? And one would consider usually that lack of intimacy is dirty laundry. But what for me was important was to talk about this because I remember in my own body just how lonely a marriage could be when there's lack of intimacy. And that loneliness can take people down a very, very dark road that seems at times like there's no end to it and there's no light at the end of the tunnel. So I thought to myself, well, what if the book can become a mirror for somebody? Or if it's not a mirror directly, what if it can just become like a side path they enter, and maybe seeing it there will help them to understand how they want to word it if they ever want to bring it up with somebody. So that was what I was hoping would come out of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and just hearing you, it sounds like, by being aware of these big, strong topics that could impact women in particular, actually it filters through to your motherhood. It's not in isolation, it filters through to who you are as a being. These two big responsibilities or aspects of your relationships, whether it is as a parent or as a spouse, that it filters through how you show up, how you think, your happiness, and it sounds like your book brings the two together through their visit at Stamford Hospital. Um, Great. And then, so when you were writing this, and when you talk about the gender roles, I know we spoke about it before at the start. Do you mind just telling us a little bit more as to what you were hoping to get out of the gender roles? You talk about it being based in Singapore. Is there a theme between the two that you wanted to call out?
Yeah, I think gender dynamics, no matter where it really unfolds, can be quite the same throughout the world. So even in Dubai, Singapore, or any other city where there is a high expat population, I think we could safely assume or look at the data that actually shows that it's typically the men whose jobs the female spouses are following. So the female partner is usually the trailing spouse, to put it concisely. So the conversation I was hoping would come out of Stamford Hospital, in which there is actually a scene of the couple fighting as they decide whether or not to stay in Singapore. I was hoping that Stamford Hospital would allow at least one person in a couple, the reader of this book, to come to terms with, to recognize, or at least to sit with the fact that this might have happened to them. They might have landed in Dubai, they might have landed in Singapore or in another place without it fully being what they want. And that has had an impact on their lives. Or if they had wanted it 10 years ago, maybe they don't want it now, and it has an impact on their lives. I think when I'm talking about gender dynamics in the book, I'm thinking about how in many couples, there are gender dynamics that say who will be the breadwinner and who won't. And at the same time, that's also embedded in a bigger system where it's not really just the couple that's deciding, but there are things like men being paid more for the same job than women, which will ultimately become a reason for men to say, but I actually get paid more, so we should follow my job, right? Because we've got two kids. And the woman, if she doesn't want to say it, but she knows it, she's probably thinking, well, yes, I know you're paid more, but that's because the system pays me 70% to do the same job. So if you use that argument, we're actually talking about the system. So that's not quite right. So there's a lot going on in a couple at any given time, but because each person embodies a different gender in many couples, then what we sometimes avoid as a couple is to talk about the way that we should surrender and make space for each other more, the ways we should listen to the experience of the other in the couple more. And as a woman, I do wonder what would happen, not just for women, but for society, if women's desires, professional desires, domestic desires, were listened to in a couple in a way where it wasn't only financial power that was the deciding factor about where a couple should go. I'm genuinely curious about what women can bring to society. And I know that this is highly hypothetical at this point, but if I were to imagine a world where half the trailing spouses were men and half were women, I wonder And I'm curious about what kind of world you would be in, what kind of things could be shaped positively. Um, so those are the things I'm thinking about when I think about gender dynamics in the book, because yeah, in the book, the woman suddenly doesn't get to pursue her PhD because the man says, but I'm here in Singapore making enough money. So what is it you want with your PhD? Your ambition is useless. I make enough money for us. Your ambition is useless. And I just sit with myself and go, how can couples have healthy relationships where everyone is respected as a capable human? Yeah.
Yeah, and just listen to you say what you just said. I'm hearing change, how we change as people, expectations. When you spoke about potentially coming to an expat city and the reality of it being different and the sacrifices that the wife ends up making to potentially pause her passions, her purpose. It's really around the reality, how reality of it makes you sacrifice. But I like it when you talk about making space. So you use the term making space for conversations, making space for each other, making space for parenthood, motherhood, and having the space to have those conversations. So, what conversations are you hoping people have after they have read your book? What are you hoping that they make space for?
Wow. I'm hoping they make space for their own stories, whatever their own reality and truths are that I might not even be able to fathom. And I love actually just thinking that there's stuff I can't even fathom that is someone else's reality. So I would hope for that I get to hear what another human's life encompasses that makes them so deeply them, whether that's a situation they're trapped in or whether that's a situation they've soared from. It can be anywhere along the spectrum as long as it's theirs. I hope that this book makes people go, yeah, what is it about that I thought was so taboo? What if I spoke up about it? And so it becomes a chance for humans to learn about one another. And I think that in the expat community in particular, it would be so lovely if those conversations that showed our nuanced differences could come out. Because as much as it's a stereotype, there's often this line, right, or this imagination that we're all just this expat blob. And I think you and I talked about this a bit at the beginning, off mic as well, where we say, in the expat population, there's a diversity of people, but the common imagination is that we are one lob of expat. And I wonder what that lob of expat image actually does to people's mental health, because if they think they need to be that to fit in the mold, if their own reality isn't that way, they might feel ashamed, or they might not even know that they can bring it up. And when a person feels like there's something about themselves that's so shameful they can't bring up, I do think their mental health suffers quite a lot. So for me, if people read this book and they resonated with either the maternal bit being difficult or the marriage bit being difficult, or a third bucket that just make them feel like, I want to speak up about this now, I'd be so delighted. So that's in addition to wanting couples to read this and talk about the decisions that they make about where to go and where to live. And luckily in Singapore, I know that's already happened. There've been people who read the book and they wrote to me, they said, hey, actually, after reading your book, I spoke to my husband and I asked him, why are we really in Singapore? What is this really about? And then they had a conversation about it. And the husband came to understand what it meant for his wife. And it's usually a conversation that people avoid. But if they can sort of, in a way, just say, I read this book and it made me think about, it helps them to ease into their reality in a way that doesn't seem combative. I think it can seem like genuine curiosity. Like, honey, I read this book. What do you think it is in our situation that may be similar or different? So I think it allows couples an entryway as well to talk about something that really could affect their lives. Yeah.
It sounds like a lot of the themes that come out of the book actually can maybe help foster those conversations between a couple just to help them get realigned.
So, mm.
And that piece around that you spoke about, expat reality, expectations from being an expat. I think a lot of the times people don't know what is expected of them, but actually that reality that kicks in, the new responsibilities they pick up. But it sounds like your book also navigates those themes.
That's an interesting point you bring up because I just realized, as you said, that people have expectations. I quickly thought to myself, I was like, yes, they do. And where do those expectations come from? And I realized that expectations, at least when I imagine them, they are usually set by people who can afford everything, who have a couple of expensive, gorgeous cars that they change every few years. And it's dawning on me as I'm speaking to you that the expectations are often set by very exclusive lifestyles that may or may not be the reality of other people. Um, so yeah, I think that sorry, I'm blanking out on the question right now, but and I want to return to what the question was, but it just hit me that when you said that I thought, wait, are we all actually in a way suffering a little bit because what we aspire to be is not what is even offered to us in the first place as expats? Yeah, what if we were just people who lived normal lives and had to go through decisions that at times felt lonely and we don't always get the support, or even if support is offered to us, we know that it comes at a cost and we're not willing to take that cost. Yeah. But Dinesh, can you just repeat your question again? Because I blanked out as I got way too excited about expectation.
I don't even think it was a question. So, no, it's so wonderful to watch you reflecting in the moment, particularly because you said so much of the stories resonate with you personally in your own personal journey, being an expat, being a third culture child. So, actually, coming back to you, your process through it, what were some themes coming up for you, or what did you learn in this process for yourself as an expat mother, as a partner?
Wow. I learned as an expat partner that being an expat partner can be complicated further when one identifies as being third culture. And there's a line in my book where I talk about how being third culture is often useful amphibiousness, but it can at times become an excuse for people to say, but you are X, therefore you should act like X, but you are Y, therefore you should act like Y. So in the case of my book, for instance, the Thai female protagonist is told that she shouldn't have ambitions because she is Thai. Um, and she's kind of going, well, I'm Thai, but not really. Anyways, I'm so confused, but you're telling me I'm Thai, which is not untrue. And so in a way, I think I've learned that being an expat partner crossed or intersecting with somebody who is third culture can mean that the things people want to extract from you can feel endless because it feels like your identities are endless or your possibilities are endless. And it's become more and more important to me as I get older to understand that being a person filled with possibilities shouldn't have to come at the cost of being porous. I should still have some core. And being an expat partner is a situation that gets myself and other people to ask, what is it at my core? Because if I'm here, people see me one way, people expect me to respond one way. I'm supposed to be flexible because this is a different country, it's a different setting. But where does the flexibility begin to betray who I am? So being an expat, I think, because it forces you to respond to a different setting, can also become an opportunity to think about what needs to stay for you to be true to yourself. And that's something I wouldn't have been able to answer 10 years ago, 12 years ago when I first moved to Singapore. But I think after going what I've gone through, after writing this book, I realized that, yeah, maybe things would have been different if I knew what I needed at my core instead of being the flexible expat partner.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And again, it comes back to that mindset that you're sharing. That's your mindset through this process and what you learn. And actually, we're so quick to being bitter towards our situation and bitter towards other people. But I remember you spoke about actually, it's something around you can enjoy motherhood, you can enjoy being a partner, you can enjoy being an expat, but it doesn't make it easy. And what we can control, by the sounds of it, is very much actually what are our boundaries? How do we hold on to what needs to stay? Where do you realign your control to keep hold of what still serves you well and not be flexible with those pieces? Or just realign yourself so you have that better, I hate this word, but balance between everything.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think sometimes the tough bit in reality is that it's part of a journey and people change and you yourself change, right? So sometimes I think in reality, the tough bit is tough but not impossible, but to deal with is when you realize that you are changing and you realize that within the same relationship or relationships, the conversations are going to have to change because you've realized that you've changed a certain way. So I think in reality, the tough bit is going, is this something that is important enough for me? Or is it something that has become important enough for me that I'm willing to introduce this to existing relationships and see how it goes?
Yeah, I think that's such a crucial point where you say, where when you realize you've changed, actually, how often do we realize we've changed? And was there a particular moment for you when you realized, actually, I've changed? And was there a particular moment for Teresa when she realized that she had also changed?
Ooh, for myself, I realized I had changed while writing the book, actually. So it took 4 years to write and edit the book. I know that the writing process allowed me to see my own change because I could not stop writing and I decided to own my story and I decided to be so brutally honest with what could be written on the page that I felt a distance between me and my then partner. And that distance was actually what allowed me to see me for the first time so clearly. I was like, ah, this is what you think. This is what you want. This is what you're willing to talk about. This is what you will not say, no, I'm sorry, I'm not going to talk about this. This is what you will talk about, Thammika. This is what you hope to contribute to society. So I got to see me from the writing process. Luckily, my ex was also extremely supportive of the whole writing process, and he was able to understand that this was something I had to go through for myself. So I'm very, very lucky and grateful for that. And for the character, I think she comes to a moment of recognizing she's changed when, at one point of the book, he is offered the opportunity to fix the lack of intimacy. He actually is offered a drug that can fix it, but the drug comes with potential side effects that have such a high cost. And despite all that she has felt, somatically, intellectually, emotionally, she still chooses a path that she knows will not be easy for her. And although that might seem like a stalemate situation for some people, as if that's actually not the change, I do think that a human changes from realizing that they're in the stalemate in and of itself. So then the next question for them becomes, what do I do when I know that I'm now in a stalemate? Right? Before it's like I am in agony, which is a different question actually from what do I do now that I'm in a stalemate? So yeah, the character does come across that situation ultimately in the book, and she will have to deal with it. Mm.
Thank you so much. And, just reflecting on everything you said, um, where can people come to where can they make spaces in the work that you do to maybe discuss some of the themes coming out of the book, some of the challenges that they relate to? Is there other things that you're doing in this space?
Yeah, that's such a good question. So in Singapore, where I'm based, I will be holding some conversations with partners. One of them is an ice cream shop called Kind Cones, which is actually opening in Dubai. I just realized it might have already opened in Dubai, but we are doing an event together that is about having kind conversations on difficult topics. So there's starting to be these corporate partners who have come and said, hey, the book tackles really difficult things. And then as a team, we go, yeah, so what if we can tackle difficult things in compassionate ways where would we do that? And if it's a partner who has a space to say, come do it at my space, kind cone's like, we've got ice cream, we've got seats, let's have difficult conversations with kindness. So I say, yes, let's do that. I will also be at the Ubud Writers Festival in October/November this year. And I am keeping my heart and mind open to the communities who really respond to this story and just say, hey, can you come over to our city? We want to have an author chat. And if we do something like that, my vision of it is, yes, I may be physically present, but what should really drive the room is the energy and the story of the readers and what they bring to the room. So to answer your question, where these conversations can happen is not just in the living room of the readers amongst themselves, but I myself am excited about the public opportunities I'm having to be there with the readers and talk about all of this. And slowly and but surely, it'll be one city at a time around the world. Yeah.
I love that because that's right up my street. I love all forms of community coaching. I love female-led events and coaching. So yeah, so excited to follow you and just hear more about what you do in this space. And hopefully one day you get to come over to the UAE as well.
I'd love to. I'd love to. I'd love to. I'd love to. Yeah.
So can you tell us, so in the UK, globally, in the UAE, how can people get hold of your book?
Right. So in the UK right now, it's available on Amazon and it's for next day delivery, which is very convenient. For those in the US, I've been recommending Barnes& and Noble online, but there are people who said, I actually want to get this from my independent bookstore. So they actually put in an order at their independent bookstore, which I fully, highly support as well. And if one is in Singapore, it is usually in Kinokuniya, Singapore, but it's sold out. And even at the warehouse, they're completely out of it. But there are local independent bookstores that still carry a couple of copies. So I've been recommending it to people there. And for those in Dubai, there's a transfer to be in Kinokuniya, Dubai. So anybody who wants to see this in Kinokuniya, Dubai, please do make some noise to Kinokuniya, Dubai, so they would know to put in an order. I think it would be the start of wonderful conversations we can have.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Thammika. Your storytelling is so captivating and you have such a gentle, soft way in which you talk about quite important themes that I think at some point, whether it's through the motherhood or through the relationships with their partners, I'm sure a lot of women readers, not just expats, will really be able to relate to. So thank you so much again for taking the time out to speak with me and my little bubbling community at the coaching chapters. And we wish you best of luck with your book. And I can't wait to read your book.
Oh, well, thank you, Vinesh. That was really fun. Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Coaching Chapters podcast. I hope today's conversation left you feeling inspired and reminded you of what's possible when you follow your own calling, your own passion. If you love this episode, don't forget to subscribe, share it with a friend, and leave us a review. And remember, every big journey starts with a small idea, a small passion, and a small calling for purpose.